Welcome to this special edition of The View with Vertex. CISRS, or the Construction Industry Scaffolders Record Scheme, have proposed massive changes to the scheme rules. It should be noted that these changes have not been without opposition, and this has led to the formation of the Scaffolding Training Alliance. The most important thing in this whole debate is you, the scaffolder. I would encourage you to watch the entire episode, all the way to the end and the series of episodes that follows. It's important for you to draw your own conclusions. We must ensure that scaffolding training benefits you, the scaffolder, the person doing the job. If the training benefits you, the scaffolder, it will then benefit the training centres, the NASC, the employers and CISRS, but only if we keep you, the learner, at its heart. Thank you and enjoy the episode.
Changes to the way that training looks.
That's the first one. No, we're doing it annually. We're committed now annually.
We've got the number for TG30 compliance sheets that have been produced, have you?
Oh, a month one was a minor, minuscule number. It was about 250, if my memory serves me correctly.
I'd say at least 20% of those were making necessarily been. They've had the criticisms, I think it's fair to say. So, Clive, welcome back to The View with Vertex, because Absolutely. It is indeed the second time.
It is, Isaac. I think it's about 18 months ago when we were at the National Federation of Builders.
Oh, was it long ago?
Board, yeah.
That was what? An hour and a half's worth of setup for 20 minutes of
brummy dulcet tones talking about what I'd discovered with NASC and just working as NASC CEO.
Well, you were really new to the NASC at that point.
Yeah.
And a lot of water has gone under the bridge since then. A lot of time and a lot of changes.
Yeah, we're motoring, aren't we?
Have been made. Without a doubt, things are certainly moving at pace. It's just interesting to see, how it's developed, because I think, first of all, it's like we now have a CEO. We didn't have a CEO. We've got a business plan. We didn't previously have a business plan. I guess Wayne coming in, it was just that point, wasn't it, where we were transitioning. There was going to be a new president pretty soon, so things were always going to look a little bit different. But then, since we had that meeting, I think when we had that last podcast, SG38 was an exclusive as well.
Yes.
SG38 was just about to be launched. Quite fitting, actually. We would mention that because I think it's Mental Health Awareness Week next week. So I'd encourage everybody to
absolutely
have a look at SG38. And even that, it was change. It was positive. It was things that we've all asked for, and they've come to fruition. Other things that the industry have asked for are things like TG30, changes to the way that training looks, reforms to CISRS, and these things are also in the process of being delivered. They've not been quite as easy to roll out and have not necessarily been. They've had the criticisms, I think it's fair to say. I think the one about TG30, because we may as well speak about it. We did want to speak about reforms, and he says we've got a bit of an exclusive there, which is, it's always nice to get a nice exclusive. But the TG30, I think one of the criticisms with that is that it's not finished, it doesn't work, it's not it's not fit for purpose. Yeah. We've not got this yet, we've not got that yet. What would you say to those kind of criticisms?
Look, TG30 is 13 manufactured types of system scaffold in comparison to the 2 tube and fit. The platform, the e-portal, and the development of the e-portal, the user interface is relatively well tested, but actually bringing in the variations and the different formats did for NASC and the team that are developing it with our partners CADs. Of course, some questions about, well, how's it going to work? How are the people going to use and develop and accept, or are we going to need to see some wholesale modifications? So we reviewed, well, how are we going to roll this out some 12 months ago, and we decided, right, well, let's just do it in parts. Why? So that we can test and see what you, the sector want. To go out and launch everything in one big go and then find we haven't quite got it right, not only is a waste of members' money, and we're a not-for-profit trade association, we invest very wisely. Our boards are very mindful of the investment that's being made. So all of that goes into, well, we'll have a staged approach, and bringing the generic out has been a really good test, seeing and getting feedback, which has been very positive. But when we rolled TG20 out, it was less positive. We learnt a lot. So it's about learning, and don't forget the actual engineering calculations that are going in, and we really are now in the trenches, if you excuse the sort of metaphor, of getting through all of that engineering work from all the calculations from the 13 manufacturers that we're working with. And there's subtle nuances between each of the manufacturers which we've got to understand. So that's allowed us to test the user functionality and ultimately bring the correct engineering calculations. And we're on target and on budget, so I'm really pleased. And what's really positive actually is when you consider the second release, which we've just done just over 2 weeks ago, we've seen a massive spike now in the compliance sheets. And again, very little feedback of negativity or change or challenge. So again, I'm fortified and quite pleased with the way we've structured it, we're delivering it, and we'll continue right the way through to September with release after release. Interestingly, TG20, we've got to bring on more releases of TG20, so watch this space.
I think the fact that it's now cloud-based as opposed to how it was in 2013, it was something you had to download into your computer. The updates are easily, well, not easily, that's probably the wrong way of putting it, but it's easier to update at the back end. And then, you might be some updates and changes overnight. So I think,
Well, you say it so easily. Actually, Isaac, it isn't.
Easier.
Yeah, I can tell you now when you're actually in the we have a Thursday team meet, project team meet, and we all come together. And when we're at release, the team are crossing T's, dotting I's repeatedly. The engineers, the coders are all going through varying, and we do a release on a Saturday night. Why? Because it's the least point when it's being used, so we know that this is
limiting the downtime. I guess.
Well, it's limiting the downtime. But this is a product that's used. I mean, to give you an idea, 12,000 TG20 compliance sheets are issued on a monthly basis.
Monthly.
Right. This is a major product that is used by members and non-members to assure their clients that it's a product and a system that's been erected correctly, and that there is a TG20 compliant sheet that can actually be demonstrating the purposes of the actual scaffold.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably, I don't know if I'm in the minority or what, because I think people like to criticise for criticism's sake. But I mean, I use I don't know if you've got the number for TG30 compliance sheets that have been produced, have you?
Oh, month one was a minuscule number. It was about 250, if my memory serves me correctly.
I'd say at least 20% of those were me.
Probably. I've seen your training, PowerPoint, so I'm sure there's a few inside that.
Yeah. Well, you produce them one every time. You take them right the way through the process.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I was delivering a training course a couple of weeks ago, and it's purely anecdotal, but I was asking the people on the course to give me the arrangements, decking arrangements, standard spacing, all the rest of it for low class 3 birdcage scaffold using this particular system. And the manufacturer's instructions are really comprehensive. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of information in there, and then they're looking through, and they're like, don't know what you're talking about. So I thought, it's okay. We'll go something a little bit easier. We'll do an independent scaffold, low class 3. Just show me what it looks like. Show me the tie pattern. This, that, and the other. And again, they're looking through the book and they're like, and they managed to find something at the back related to ties. So I said, okay, that independent scaffold's now going up on. One's going up on this property here, and the other one's going up. Top of the Pennines, different wind loading. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
What do each one of those scaffolds look like? What's the tie duty? Blah 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 blah. And you're like, we can't tell you. And I said, well, that's why it's important. That is why TG30 is important. Is it going to be perfect? No. And I think the industry's going to have to accept that system scaffolding and some of the system scaffold manufacturers out there are fantastic. The products, the innovation, the money they spend on research and development to make sure that their products are market leading. And I think to a degree, TG30 caps them in a way. It reduces, like, you're not going to have an independent scaffolder at a low class 6, for example. My question to that though would be, well, why do you need
I mean, we go
an
back
independent to low class 6? If you're doing bricklaying or block on a new build property, you probably don't need the scaffold to be that strong anyway. So let's limit the capacity of them, but give people who are ultimately responsible for accepting ownership of that scaffold, give them the facility and the information to be able to to inspect it and give them a basis for comparison. We've asked for this.
Well, you've
given us this.
But you go back, Isaac, to the fundamentals. When I joined, and one of the key strategic decisions was inclusivity. And TG20, tube and fit, brilliant. Scotland, Scottish meeting. I will remember, it will be, and for Ronnie, our current Scottish regional chair, he will remember there were some really vocal members saying, well, look, it's not fair. We haven't got an equivalent for system scaffold. We are not able to easily convince a client and say, yeah. And the client is hearing TG20, TG20. The health and safety executive recognises TG20. So as soon as you're coming along to a client that may not be most well informed and talking about system, TG30 is absolutely the personification. Then you get to the technical information. Absolutely. It's about wind loading. It's about the loading. Is it for painting and decorating, or is actually you're doing masonry work? Of course, you've got to then factor in the loading. And as we've gone through the actual engineering calculations for building TG30, I know one of the key concerns the technical team has had is actually about ties, because in the manuals, we've quite often seen actually the number of ties not being clearly understood. We're seeing actual scaffolding projects that haven't got the right number of ties in. Now we're seeing what's coming out of TG30. So actually TG30 is not only solving the technical information that the client needs, that the wind loading's fine, the ties are correct, the leg loading's correct for the purpose of the project, but he's actually also informing the scaffolder far more quickly. Actually, this is the number of ties. So it has multitudes of benefits. But it's also, let's be really, really clear, we've got a talent problem. I mean, I know we're going to move on to the talent in a minute. We've got a talent problem. System scaffolding, arguably 40% more efficient in time, effort. Yeah, it's more expensive, pays off. It's becoming more popular. This is about, with TG30, just balancing the whole of the equation. We've got to be inclusive. We've got to be for every type of scaffolding, not just tube and fit. And so absolutely goes to the core of inclusivity of NASC's agenda.
So we touched on it a little bit. Talent shortages. There are huge, I would say, reforms happening behind the scenes currently, but soon to be announced.
Some are announced. I mean, that's what we're here today to kind of talk about. Absolutely. You alluded in your preamble to the governance changes within NASC, and you talked about Wayne. Yeah, Wayne is our current president and chairman, but before that, David Brown. Before that, Lynn Way. The changes started actually going right the way back to Lynn. And we have to be really, really clear here. The B2B report that actually was seminal inside NASC, the actual perception survey, which we've done again with CISRS, was actually the profound moment that allowed the council and the board to realise, actually, hold on, is NASC in the right place? Yeah, okay, I'm the appointed CEO, but as I said when we first had the podcast, those changes for NASC, the many things that we do brilliantly, we've talked about the guidance, SG38, and mental health, brilliant, that piece of work that has been written by the Health and Safety Committee, all that technical scaffolding knowledge about the actual application of mental health, that's brilliant. But actually the other things NASC were doing weren't so good, and we've already reflected on that and changed it. Well, that's exactly the same now we're seeing with CISRS.
So just for people who might not be aware, CISRS, CISRS, it's the Construction Industry Scaffolders Record Scheme.
Correct.
And as we've spoke about before, I think people have got a reasonable understanding of what NASC is.
I'd like to think so. Yeah, I'd like to think so.
I think so, and I think with the media presence and social media presence that NASC has now got, that understanding is growing. Yeah. There's a better understanding of what NASC is and what its function is. And we probably will touch on it later on, but with CISRS, the Construction Scaffolders Record Scheme, first and foremost, who are CISRS?
Okay, so CISRS, based on Companies House records, anybody can go and check this, is owned by the national scheme, that us, NASC. That's it. And that's been the same for, its inception. And its formation came from NASC's position as the employers' organisation. Now, this is a bit of a technical thing. I don't want to baffle people, but the employers' organisation is the recognised organisation by the union. And it came about, CISRS came about actually wanting to see competence and rewarding competence with a proper pay framework for the union. So it was the union and the employers' organisation working together that wanted to see competence and improved training and education to be seen within the scaffolders, and for that pay scales to be rewarded effectively. That was the backdrop of it 50 odd years ago. So fast forward to today, well, that architecture is no different. So when people say, oh, well, it shouldn't be with NASC, well, actually, NASC is the employers' organisation recognised by the union. CISRS is run for that collective, for the employees that are the union, and for ultimately the employers' organisations. And all the structures that have been around, based around that, have been what forms it. And another really important factor is NASC's guidance documents, NASC's recognised guidance documents, forms the bedrock of the actual standards that you expect to be delivered by a scaffolder. So the learning, the training, and then endpoint assessment of competence is all based on TG20, SG4. Hold on. So it's an absolutely natural migration from NASC into CISRS. We've got partners that obviously deliver the training and then do the assessment. That's the CISRS centres. But CISRS itself absolutely is a standard setting certification body. It's an educational centre, yes, in that it produces the content, but it's aiming for competence. And that CSCS card, the scaffolders card, that's actually the point of competence, where somebody is actually competent to get on a scaffold and to work in a scaffold in a safe way.
And in terms of the delivery of that, we touched on the training centres. In terms of the delivery of that, who can deliver CISRS training?
Well, I mean, currently we obviously have two elements to that. We've got the centres. They have to go through a centre specification and an audit, and they get validated on an annual basis. And then we have the trainers, and there's a well recognised within the old CAP books. Notice the word old CAP books. I'm sure you're going to come on to that in a moment. But the CAP books ultimately laid out for the last 50 odd years the quality of the trainer. And ultimately those two combined with then the PowerPoint presentations, which yes, have their strengths but also some major weaknesses, are ultimately what makes up the training content, which are then delivered by the CISRS centres with an endpoint assessment where you end up with a qualified and competent scaffolder, we hope.
And the CISRS centres themselves, so you have the likes of, say, Simeon, Fulcrum, Safety and Access, Aspects Total, like commercial training centres.
Correct, and some colleges.
And then you have CITB training centres, colleges.
There's also, though, other centres that are colleges. And this is where there's a lot of capacity issues, which we do need to talk about. That's one of the fundamental reasons why we're changing the centre specification. Let's talk about 16 to 17-year-olds in colleges. Currently, you go off to a construction college. You've been a low achiever academically in school. It happens, varying reasons. We can talk a bit about that. But ultimately, you go to a construction college at the moment, it's brickwork, it's joinery, it's electrotechnical, it's plumbing. Hold on, where's scaffolding?
And do you feel like the challenge has been the centre specification for that part of it?
100%.
Because, I mean, I'll make no bones about it. I'll be clear with everybody. I have been fairly vocal, and I know I've been in consultation with you guys.
You're not the only one that's vocal, I can assure you, Martin.
But I'd say there's a lot of stuff that's out there in the public domain now about, let's say, the 10-metre height restriction for a CISRS training centre that I've been really critical of, and I still believe, for reasons that you've just alluded to there, that that there needs to be some give on that. I think from a commercial training centre, I think those buildings tend to be 10-metre high industrial sheds, tend to be either miles out of the way, so they're like in farmland, or do you know what I mean, difficult to get to on public transport, or they tend to be, if they are in the city centres, extremely expensive, which ultimately you've got to recover that cost somewhere, and it's going to be either the scaffolder or the employer that's going to pay that cost.
Absolutely.
So I've been quite vocal in that those restrictions should be lifted and moved, and we should have a different spec And I guess that allows the colleges to deliver the CISRS training.
Well, there's several variables here. So 10 metre rule, let's just deal with the 10 metre rule. 10 metres, extremely important when we start talking about the course content for the advanced scaffolder, which is 18% of trainees. So we've built a centre spec based on a fairly small minority percentage-wise of the total number of learners. That's not quite right. Please note that we're talking about a specific percentage here, and all the changes that we've actually undertaken following the perception survey CISRS has undertaken is very much about not the hubris or the thinking or just how people feel, but actually about well-reasoned, well-considered, fact-based changes. So when we start talking about our current learning model and people talk about capacity, let's just talk about how many 16 to 17-year-olds that are currently going through the system. None. Zero. Very, very small numbers. We're talking single hands, 5 people a year. And we're wondering why we have a talent problem. Okay? So, yeah, we've absolutely got to get into FE. We've absolutely got to get our smaller, shorter courses that CISRS can offer into 16 and 17-year-olds, so we actually have somebody that's economically viable that can come out to an employer and actually then be trained onto part 1. And let's start talking about actually, well, hold on, if we can inspire those young people into our sector, yeah, it's not going to solve all of our talent problem. We have got a big, but we've got to start somewhere, and that's about changing that centre spec so that it is commercially viable for a further education centre to absolutely have a centre. And if you start talking about 10 metres and advanced, well, an FE college is not going to do advanced, so it's not fit for purpose. So that doctrine of one size fits all is absolutely wrong. Equally, coming to the commerciality of the centre, gosh, we're deeply respectful of our centres that are investing millions in having a very large shed. Those big tall 10 metre are brilliant. They're going to give real advantages as well for all year round training, for all year round weather. And we've got to recognise that in what they're doing. But equally, if we're talking about a 16 or 17-year-old, we don't necessarily need that. So the specification that's being published and comes live in July is very much about creating that capacity so that the 16, 17-year-olds in FE can go through a CISRS centre. And that lines up a capacity then of more learners coming to those centres that are the all-year-round weather centres, that actually have employers wanting to then invest in those young people. So we're increasing the capacity, not just for the CISRS centres that are current, but also future CISRS centres.
And so, with the changes in specification, I suppose the challenge for some of these existing training centres is that they would have new people entering the market, and they're tied into long leases for big buildings. Is there some sort of mechanism for either, helping these companies to pivot or to...
Yeah, absolutely. Look, again, we're very respectful of the commitment that the centres have given. There's an 18-month moratorium on UK centres, especially outdoor centres. That's to allow the current centres to migrate over. We will be running pilots. I'm sure Paul, when you've interviewed him, talked about the CPD. We talked about the new courses, the digitisation. We're going to have to pilot that somehow. So we've not tied our hands completely about no pilots. We've got to be able to test and run things. I go back to the big message. This isn't about just what one or two people think. This is about going to be researched and well tested and involving the entire sector to understand the quality of the training, making sure the output is fit for purpose. We want well-trained people. We want well-motivated people in our employees, and we want that to be affecting the employer. That's what is at the heart of this. We want the employer organisation, I go back right the way to the genesis of CISRS, has to be at the forefront of it. Coming back, though, to the centre spec, we've got to also look at that transition allows the current centres to be more flexible. I would put it to the centres, if they're listening to this, and I hope they are, this gives those centres that are currently there the opportunity to engage with FE, to start talking about 16 and 17-year-olds, to talk about apprenticeships. 800 apprenticeship vacancies we currently have on average a year. Hold on, for 120,000 workforce, that's ridiculously low. Look at any of the other statistics for any of the other trades; it's far too low. So I would put it to the centres.
Why have we got such low? I mean, if 800 for an industry that employs, did we say 120 people, 120,000? Sorry.
Yeah.
and 800 spaces available. And I'm guessing that space is available. I'm guessing not all of those spaces are filled, or are they all filled? Or
no, they're all filled. I mean, if I go back to that Scottish meeting I referred to, where members raised some very legitimate questions in Scotland, they couldn't get apprenticeships. They said there was a backlog. That's been
Northern
proven.
Ireland the same, I think.
Northern Ireland the same, and certain regions. I mean, we were at a Midlands regional meeting only last week, and one of our own council members said, "Hold on, I'm in Worcestershire. To get to my nearest centre is a 2.5 hour drive." Oh, hold on, if you're an apprentice, how the hell are you going to do that? Oh, I'll pop you in the travel lodge in south of Birmingham at 17.
It's
That's
crazy.
just not practical.
For me, it seems like it's atrophied, like the capacity, which is like, if we're saying there's a shortage in, there's a skill shortage. I know there's still a college in Manchester, in Withenshaw. One of my parts too in Mancat. It's Openshaw College. I could get a bus to there from my house. It was really accessible, and it seems like things are less accessible now.
Correct, and they've become less accessible because of the standards that we have been setting standards around a totalitarian single size, single fit creates no flexibility. And with no flexibility, you then end up with, we can only have, and if you pick, for example, London, a centre that costs an extremely large amount of money, the ability to deliver apprenticeships in an extremely expensive shed is actually very unachievable. There's controls around the costs of apprenticeships. It's not commercially viable because guess what? You've got to fund a £3.4 million shed. Well, no wonder the apprenticeship model doesn't work. So this goes right to the heart of actually fundamentally changing that specification, making it more flexible, making it more capacity driven, and allowing the centre to be closer to where the learners are and where the actual contractors are. And if we do that, the old adage, I think Wayne said it in his podcast, build it and they will come. Absolutely, we've got to start it. But we've equally got, coming up, the trainer programme. And we've got to recognise that we haven't got enough trainers. So be assured, we are absolutely committed to supporting the CISRS centres in not only freeing them up, giving them an 18-month moratorium on the new centres, but giving them the ability to start looking at new centres and a good flow of trainers coming in so that they can fill the capacity on that.
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be quite a lot of legacy issues, shall we say? And I don't necessarily think that we shouldn't blame people for it. I think it's difficult to really be able to point the fingers to why things have ended up the way they've ended up. However, we are where we are, and I think most people, if you only have to go on LinkedIn, people wanted training to change, and a lot of the changes that are being recommended or proposed, they seem to be the things that we've asked for.
Absolutely.
For example, we will touch on training outdoors. At the end of the day, we're a predominantly outdoor trade, so the fact that we couldn't deliver training outdoors seems bizarre to me. More to the point, and I think this is what for me the big criticism has been. There seems to be a lot of double standards and a lot of contradictions within what previously would have been the caps, right? As in, you can deliver a certain type of course, but you can't, which includes this content, but then you can't deliver that course and that course, which include the same content, but you're not qualified to do that yet. Strange. You can deliver a 2-day SSBTS course at a client's premises outside. That's fine, but that can't be a part one.
Yeah.
Even though it's the same structures, just with tube and fitting rather than system.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think wherever you have contradictions in terms, you're going to piss people off. Excuse my French, but
look, I mean, Isaac.
Nobody likes double standards, do they?
They don't. Let's start with some very simple. 17 cat books, really? And that's the reality of how many different course syllabus structures we had, which is why we now have, and with the centres, we've put in place now a very even, very balanced contract with what's called the training manual. And the training manual, being very honest with you, is just literally the cat books consolidated into one document, and it is a big read. It's 270 odd pages. We made some very minor changes around the language. The cat books hadn't been reviewed, and we're still talking about employers, because the original CISRS program was to be designed and delivered by the employer. And we were still within the CAD books talking about employers, not organisations, not the training providers. So you're absolutely right. So coming back to that first question about, the past, there's been an underinvestment in CISRS. There just has been, and NASC was not much dissimilar. There was an underinvestment, partly because of the business planning process and the evolution of the organisations. And as somebody who's worked within training and education for a very long time, and I was very heavily involved in the IPATH courses back in the 1990s, and you've got to invest in them. You've got to provide the required skills, the required technical ability. You've got to look at the way it's being delivered, and you've got to monitor and maintain that constantly. CISRS hasn't done that. It's built a brilliant program, very good 10 years or so ago, but change is constant and it's getting faster. And if you don't manage that change, if you don't manage where we're moving, you're going to have arguments about putlocks being in bloody courses. You're going to have arguments about, well, should we be talking about rakers? Because we're not keeping it current.
We've always done it like that.
Absolutely.
And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But the industry does move on, and if the training doesn't move on to, another thing that's always, and we'll probably need to speak about this as well as the trainer. One of the big frustrations for me with the shadowing requirements, once when I was actually becoming a CISRS instructor, I found the shadowing requirements really overly. They were very kind of intensive and time consuming. 2 weeks sitting and watching someone deliver a course.
Yeah.
And then another 2 weeks sitting watching somebody else delivering a course. One had to be in your own training centre, one had to be in someone else's training centre, and then someone had to observe you delivering the first course. So you're talking about, from a commercial perspective for your employer, they're having to pay for you to sit and watch, and then for someone to sit and watch you, that's 6 weeks of non-productive time. Aside from that is, who are you shadowing?
Yeah.
Because,
absolutely.
Unfortunately, there have been good instructors and not so good instructors.
Absolutely.
And if you're shadowing the not so good instructor, you might as well not.
And even if you've got a good instructor can have a bad day. And reality is, you do learn from people, but that model of operation, if I'm really blunt, is pretty well outdated.
I think it stems back from a time when it was CITB centres.
Correct.
You had a centre in Glasgow and you had a centre in Birmingham, and you could easily send one guy from this guy, this guy to another guy.
And you had a levy-based system.
Yeah.
You had a levy-based system that drew down funding through the CITB funding, which wasn't a commercial model. Very different today. If you look at our CISRS centres, and this goes back to the heart of that support that we want to give, there's a massive cost in training the trainers up. There's a massive cost in the current model in actually the trainers having commercial value. And look, let's be candid. I see commercial interest flowing out from the training of the trainers. Let's lay the cards on the table. That's not creating capacity in CISRS. If we want capacity in CISRS to start tackling the 16, 17-year-olds and to start having a bigger, it's got to be funded, but we've also got to make it so that it's accessible. This is also, though, and we have to be really honest with the trainers, if you're going to become a trainer, be that you're funding it yourself to become a trainer and you're going to commercially want to work as a trainer in the centres, or you're running a centre and you're investing in people to be your trainers, that's got to be a cost that's reasonable, recoverable. And we've got to look at how we use technology and video, looking at mentoring as a form of actually sense checking for learners has its place, but it can be done in a different way. Chat boards, shared knowledge, having a buddy that you can actually say, I had this difficulty with this one student, what did you do? Having that ability, absolutely. But if you look at the modern train-the-trainer models that IPATH and varying other providers already use.
PASMA, similar.
Yeah, PASMA, IPATH, others have got courses, but they're short courses. These are vocational, and we must remember, big difference between a short course with just an endpoint assessment of a 2-day, 1-day, 5-day course. CISRS isn't. It's a vocational qualification, and we have got to be realistic about, actually, you're talking about somebody who is a teacher. And they have to have that ability. But if you look at teachers currently in your average comprehensive school, they have CPD. And we've got to start to look at our trainers being that professional. So next year, we're very committed to bringing in a trainer's card, We want to see a proper trainers program. We want to see a proper trainers CPD. That is what we need to see for the training community. That actually brings in some real value then. When we see a black hat that's getting to sort of that point in their career, I really want to get off the tools. Let's face it, that happens. Currently, where's training in that next step? It's not even on the horizon. Well, we've got to be aspirational. We've got to actually train the trainer as an ability to go, actually, I might go and start passing on my craft skills. Good old days of the journeyman, you know. That was about somebody who would train on, I hate the word journeyman, it's a bit sexist, a bit old school nowadays. But the reality is the journeyman passed on their skills. We need to start invigorating that idea that training is an honourable thing, that you can get a good career out of it, and there's a route to it.
Yeah, and then it happens, you know, we shouldn't forget that it happens predominantly outside of a training centre.
Oh, 100%.
You know, training happens within the business that you work for.
Should we touch on, because we kind of skirted around this open air learning. The open air learning for parts of the current CISRS programme is already mandated. So the inspection course I'm looking at, it was already external. We've got part twos that are already out and have been working on site. They are already experienced, not qualified scaffolders, but they're scaffolding. So they're already in the world that is wet, cold, warm, sweaty, and that environment is something that we've actually got to recognise. And as an employers community, they're baffled by why the training centres go, oh, no, it's got to be inside. Now, there are some variables which we've got to consider. First of all, distraction, especially for your part ones that are inexperienced, being cold, being wet, being hot. If you're trying to train somebody on that, there is a reason that there could be capacity to learning and distraction from the learning message you're trying to get over. But with the new specification, we've been really, really clear, and we've set some very clear auditing controls in place so that the distractions are absolutely mitigated. And that
I'd argue the contrary. I think sometimes being in a training centre can create its own distractions. You've got a group, say, taking part in a system scaffolding course, and they're smashing away their hammers, bang, 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 when you're always having to tell them to stop in order for you to
be able
get
to
the attention of this guy. So, you know, it's an outdoor trade.
There's outdoors. I mean, I'm looking at it purely from a perspective of the quality of the learning. You're absolutely right. But the distraction could still be a machine that's operating that's deafening half the learners. So that's just good learning. And having a trainer that would turn around and go, sorry, we need to just stop for a second and take control of the situation is as important. But actually having a mandated program where it was internal, one size, one fits, that's it, to then actually say, no, we can do outdoor training. We've still got to change then the controls and the metrics around it. And I'm very confident, we've legally had it tested, that we've got a good outdoor working model with CCTV, with a requirement so that we can audit with randomised audits, so there is an increased cost for the outdoor, which balances, I might add, virtually to the fact that the larger 10 metre, now 8 metre, because we've reduced that height, has a similar level of cost. Also outdoor, there is one major knock-on. Certain parts of a programme may have to be stopped due to weather. And in the UK, that's roughly 10% of the working environment is damaged or affected by effectively bad weather. Too cold, pouring rain, heavy pouring rain. So would that be
like a yellow weather warning? Or
correct, and we're absolutely talking about a very clear definition. But CISRS is stepping up its ordering process, not just for the weather, but just generally we're stepping up the auditing process and moving to a far more focused, risk-based approach, which will include weather. So if you are below 8 metres and you've got an enclosed space, but you're using some outside space to the elements of the course that requires greater height, great. We are looking in the medium term, once the programme has been digitised and we understand the full structure, to actually have a more flexible approach. Well, if it's raining on a Wednesday, okay, well, we'll do that element of that programme, we'll do that inside. And we'll be doing that bit of that course this week. By the way, but then we'll move it around the other way round.
This is something that I know that most training centres will say that doesn't happen, but it does.
Yes.
You know, and I'm not, and so it should really. Yeah. Like, it's a dynamic environment. Learners learning at different speeds. Something might work one day, it might not work the next day.
Absolutely.
you should as an instructor and as somebody. Yes, you've got a criteria to follow. You've got a core structure to follow. You've got lesson plans that need to be followed, of course.
Absolutely.
But you must still have a degree of sort of flexibility as to what happens on what day. I mean,
Absolutely.
we're not robots at the end. You could have a group that maybe are a little bit slower, they're a bit more considered.
Absolutely. And we've got to make sure that the syllabus that CISRS sets out for whichever one of its courses is fundamentally delivered. Okay. Why? We've got to give the learner the maximum learning time to actually learn that content. And then we've got to have an endpoint assessment that ultimately says, actually, are they competent? Have they learnt it? What's really interesting, and we haven't touched on data, is CISRS currently doesn't capture proper data. And that came glaringly obvious when we did the perception survey. And when we talk about the 83,000 cards globally that we actually have out there, to only have 11,500 email addresses for those 83,000, whoa, what a glaring omission to our system and procedure. So we are transforming, and later on through June and July, we will be improving and improving the way data is fundamentally gathered, the way the cards are issued, the way the certificates are issued, and we're actually going to also, for the first time, be mandating it that you actually have to register the failed people. We don't currently demand that. Currently, it's only those that are passed. So how can we validate the quality of the courses and give the flexibility that's needed for the delivery if we can't actually then validate, well, how many people are failing? Because if they're failing because they haven't had the quality of training because part of the syllabus has been missed, we can start to measure it through the data. And that's the real total inclusive approach that we need to start thinking about in the way CISRS has to evolve. People have been critical. Well, hold on, we're seeing quality that's coming out and they shouldn't have passed. Well, the only way of actually doing that is to start understanding how many failed.
So what we try to achieve is like a collaborative approach. The training centres have to share this information with CISRS. CISRS have to interpret that information, measure and manage it. We have to consult on it. Currently, historically, that consultation has taken place with something called the AITO Committee. I don't think there's many people outside of the training and education kind of space that understand what a CITO is, or or what its function is. For those who don't know, what's a CITO?
So a CITO is the Access Industry Scaffolding Industry Training Organisation. I think if I've got don't you just love the acronyms that we've got?
There's a lot of them.
There is, but a CITO is an ITO. It's an industry training organisation owned and run by NASC. In the old days, it was the NASC Training and Education Committee.
So what prompted the move from a training and education committee? Because that is how NASC is made up, essentially, isn't it? It's committees. There's a marketing committee.
Correct.
There's a technical committee, or technical and safety now is amalgamate the one thing. There's a contracts committee, for example. And this is how the guidance is produced, right? The committees, they work on the guidance and that's
ideas, absolutely.
Yeah. And you would think that training, if it's part of course it's part of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
You would think we would have a committee.
Yeah, which is what a CITO was.
And a CITO was that.
Correct. Still is. A CITO is going to continue running. It's an industry training organisation. It's supported by CITB very generously. But it's an industry training organisation. And the reason it's set external to NASC...
Just going back to what you said, though, it's put together by NASC.
It was run for, absolutely, the sector.
So for the or by NASC? No,
so that's why a CITO is separate. The training organisations aren't necessarily, the training companies aren't necessarily NASC members. CITB centres are not NASC members. So a CITO, it was always felt in the history books.
So they're not automatically training provider members?
So that came along at a later date.
Right.
So we've evolved over a period of time. Things have changed, and if you look at what we see today, if we look at the challenges and the criticisms that are being levied today, if you look at the outcomes of the perception survey and the low CSAT scoring in certain parts, the low scoring on certain questions around quality, that all, no disrespect to a CITO, came out of that model. So quite rightly, when we made the changes within CISRS's board last year, when we did an open review of the governance of CISRS, one of the conclusions of the governance review from the board was, well, actually, is our academic, educational, quality controls fit for purpose? And one of the conclusions was no, they weren't, because we wouldn't be getting the criticisms that we were getting about the course content being correct, around centre capacity, around actually if you
from AITO.
No,
You weren't
from
getting
the
this
sector, we could see that. We're not blind to social media.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the criticism seems to be.
It is.
I think of a few names, but
well, I mean, and it's good to get challenged. Don't get me wrong. We're not sorting just the company of those that want to, praise. We need to have open and honest discussion and debate to get the best outcomes. And AITO wasn't the right vehicle. AITO had an amalgam of training centres and some contracting organisations on there. Okay, were they representative? No. Were the information and how the information being gathered, was it actually evidence based? And one of the conclusions of the governance, and which is why we went, right, we need to do a perception survey about CISRS, was actually, well, where's the evidence? Is it just the gut feel? Yeah, okay, there's experience. We account for experience. But experience doesn't necessarily say where you are going. It's actually looking backwards. And AITO, to a degree, just talked about where it was in a time frame. And it had only got us to the point where we actually were. If you look at the governance model, that was actually the resultant of what we've seen of CISRS today. So we've had to change it, and that's why one of the big changes is the new Quality Control Committee that is being formed with a fully independent chair that will be appointed, yes, by the CISRS board, but actually the CISRS board will hold that committee to account to ensure the quality of the course, the centres, what's being delivered, the trainer programme, all of those elements, the digitisation is all fit for purpose and correct.
And how will that committee be made up? Is it a certain sort of, because you don't just want to have 5 employers making up a committee, right? We have to have input from the training centres.
Yep.
We have to have input from certainly the employers.
Sure.
We have to have input from the employers organisation. We have to have input from the people attending the course, I would say.
Absolutely.
As well as some independent input into this committee. What's that?
Have you read the terms of reference of the committee? Because you've just summed it up. I mean, Isaac, that's exactly it. And what we're looking for, and we're just going through the process of, yes, writing a job description for the chair.
Okay. Is Wayne Connolly currently the chair?
Wayne is the chair of the board of directors of CISRS. Okay. This is
and would that have been different historically?
No, it's exactly the same. Been the same before me as group CEO. That role existed. Robin was the exact same person. So there's nothing new here on that side. This is about actually changing a entity that's external to CISRS, that has, in the form of AITO, that's had some say over a period of time. But actually now CISRS, that is legally accountable and responsible, is actually saying, no, we're forming a specific committee specifically to guide CISRS. And that will be independently chaired by an academic expert, somebody who has got the independence and the ability to criticise the CISRS board or the CISRS centres, and to be independent and to create a collective of people that equally are very, very clearly governed by the terms of reference of that committee. Commercial interests should not play a part, and I think we've danced around today on train the trainers. Well, hold on, train the trainer. Why is the commercial interest getting involved in the train the trainer? There shouldn't be. There should be an open. The Competition Act is very clear about actually having a free ability to create a structure that has not got any sort of veiled structures that prevent growth. And we've got to make sure that that committee is right, absolutely in the centre of quality of learning, quality of the scaffolding, quality of the access, quality of ultimately the competence, making sure that there's a very clear career path, and actually holding that together is going to be really important. So we're looking at somebody quite senior. We're thinking about a professor, doctor at a very senior level of standing that will actually be somebody who we can go, wow, great, we've got somebody who's controlling it. and keeping me under control, keeping Paul under control, keeping every element as a test. And if it's not going right, there will be the vocal voice. We don't want it on social media. We want somebody saying, sorry, this is wrong. You've got to fix this, CISRS.
Yeah. So how does because this would probably lead on to a couple of sort of objections that we hear a lot. The scaffolder, the actual man or woman on the tools, fixing scaffolds day in, day out.
Absolutely.
How do we ensure that their needs are met and that they are represented?
So, future scaffolders, we need to get a proper, clear career path for them. And they need to, as they're going through learning, have the ability to go, this isn't fit for purpose. For whatever reason, I don't feel comfortable at that. And that's why some of the centre spec CCTV, for example, is very much about protecting those learners right at the beginning. You follow through then, through to CPD. We've equally got to make sure that the CPD and the continuous learning is actually really fit for purpose. But equally, inside that digitisation process, there must be routes to give feedback. At this moment in time, where does the feedback go for your average centre?
Well, there's a feedback form at the end of the...
where does that go?
I have absolutely no idea. But I'd imagine it's filed away in a case somewhere.
Yeah, well, case for the defence rests, my Lord Isaac. The reality is we need to start gathering that feedback. That will start being inside the digital systems. That
I think
will
it's
start
sometimes biased as well, the feedback that you gather. I think if you ask, I think you need to openly ask for what do you think was good?
Absolutely.
What do you think could be improved? Because otherwise, I mean, generally you either get, if someone's had they've had a stinker, and we all have them, do you know what I mean? Somebody might, let you know about it in the feedback form afterwards. Yeah. I think someone told me that I should have worn a shirt once because it was an inspection course. Like, I'm wearing PPE. It's
Absolutely,
it says the company's name on it. But
so that the high vis is kind of getting in the way.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even high vis. It was a very nice polo shirt. But anyway, I should have worn a button-up shirt. Apparently. So you do get some criticism. It's usually when someone, for some reason, feels like something's wrong. You will, and it has to. In my experience, it would have to be very wrong for someone to give like a negative review. And then generally the feedback forms like really enjoyed, entertaining course, made it accessible. Blah, blah. You do get some positive stuff. But you're right. We need to make sure that's measured.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we're asking for it in the right way. Because if we're just asking for a blank, what are your comments? Generally, a lot of them are going to feel either obliged to say thanks in some way by leaving a nice comment, or they're going to feel like if it was really bad, then. Absolutely. But we need pragmatic and measurable.
Well, here's something that came out of the perception survey, which I'll share with you. We went to the card holders, as you know. We went to that 11,500. We got some 600 plus responses, and that's quite significant. If you consider the TV advertising, you only need 30, 40 people to say Purcell's brilliant. Actually, to have 600 come back is actually really positive,
and it shows you that people wanted things to change. Right?
Absolutely. Well, and the breadth of that perception survey, and if you looked at the mean response of 4.2 across the 600 out of a CISRS, that's not bad. But actually, here's the question: what do they know? They only know what they know. Trainees, learners, qualified scaffolders.
They've no basis for comparison.
Correct. So actually, we had to delve deeper, and when we went to the union, who are more experienced, they are career scaffolders, and asked them, the scoring dropped from 4.2 to 3.9, and in certain circumstances went as low as 3.2. And when you start actually
of a possible
5. So if you think about Trustpilot, that's CSAT. So would you go and buy something off Amazon if you saw a scoring of 3? 2?
I don't read the reviews. I
love a
personal
good read.
thing.
I love a good review.
Because I think someone, if they found it to be horrendous, then they'll leave a really bad review. And most of the positive reviews tend to be. And by the way, I'm just going to little disclaimer here, right? I did it when I had my scaffolding company. WhatsApp, Google review, mum, auntie, uncle. We all do. So even the positive reviews, I don't think you can garner too much, unless this is different. I appreciate it's a survey, and you've gone out to people and asked for specific information. So I get that that's different, but yeah, in terms of reading reviews, I ignore them. I know what I want.
Look, I mean, reviews, let's face it, if you go on a holiday and you're picking a villa, you pick somewhere in between and you read between the lines. Actually, when we did the review with the perception survey, PFA, the independent organisation, fully independent organisation that did the research for us, they don't do something too dissimilar. They look at the outliers, the extreme responses to the questions at either end. They also look for the moderates in the middle, and they actually start informing. And it's quite interesting when you get the report, you go, wow, okay. And some of them are really alarmist comments, but you go, oh, okay, that's somebody having a bad day. And that's the need to start monitoring. And I go back to being volume
that can't just be something
based.
I mean, perception survey, how many have we done?
Oh, that's
Is
the
that
first
it?
one. No, we're doing it
It's
annually.
only 40 years of...
We're committed now annually, and the KPIs. I mean, one of the things we haven't talked about the centre spec is we have encouraged and inputting a customer service expectation. We're also putting KPIs in about capacity and making sure that the centre is starting to actually focus in on how many apprenticeships are you actually running? Just because they're not commercially viable for you, that's not good enough. We need to start seeing that structure.
How does NASC and CISRS support the centres in that? Because I've seen this from a lot of different angles. I've been an employer. I've employed scaffolders. I've employed apprentices, and there is an attrition rate, and that's not entirely the fault of the employer or the centre.
Yeah.
Or CISRS necessarily. Sometimes it's just a result of the way I feel the apprenticeship is. There's a lot of things on there that I don't personally believe have any bearing on whether someone's going to be a good scaffolder or not. In fact, I would say that they need to spend more time focusing on basing scaffolds out and less time on things like British values and, maths and English. We've spoken about it before.
I mean, the UK government.
But what I'm saying is, how do we support the centres when there is this attrition rate and there is, people dropping out of course and things like that? How do we support the centres into making sure that they are remunerated, really? How do we make sure it's commercially viable for them?
I mean, there's remuneration, first of all. We've got to improve that. And you've seen the announcements NASC is working with organisations like City and Guilds on the bootcamp revenue. And we've got to do far more around making sure that there are good streams of supportive revenue coming into the centres. Take it as read. That is something that I know Paul holds dear. We've had meetings again with some providers this week. We're looking at new routes to getting people better revenue. Fine. The biggest issue really actually for apprenticeships is the wasted time when you actually get somebody who starts a programme and then drops out. Chaplaincy, the way we support the learner, the way we create a community around the learner, we've not done. We as an employers organisation need to support our employers a lot better in understanding actually that investing in a trainee, and I look at some contracting members and they've got it absolutely, how they treat the apprentices like gods is absolutely, to be applauded. They look after them, they care for them, they nurture that young person that's coming in. They're young people. They're susceptible to things going wrong.
For some people, the attitude is
it's an investment.
You show me that. Well, no, not even that. You show me that you want it, and if you don't want it, then that's your problem.
Absolutely.
And
look, I'm not being critical of those that are a little bit cooler and a little bit more commercially focused about it, and I'm certainly had their fingers burnt. That's where the chaplaincy needs to come in. That's where the support, and we've got some ideas. We haven't got them fully formed. Crying out loud, I was only Group CEO of CISRS as of September last year, and you've already seen that we're moving at quite a pace now, bringing the changes through. And we've got to start looking at the chaplaincy, getting the centre spec, getting the trainer program, getting the digitisation, and then starting to really ratchet up. The way our apprentices are absolutely delivered is the natural progression. I think there's other aspects though of the apprenticeship. The logbook, we've got to amend that bloody logbook. It is duplicated, it is repetitive. Hold on, there are some centres have already done that and have got the capability to do that, but we need to do that. And we recognise it. CISRS has got to start looking at how we can provide those basic tools. So when actually a learner who's not great with English or great with maths is confronted with a great big thick book, that they're not suddenly their heart drops to the floor and go, "Oh, this is what scaffolding's about? I'm not really that interested." We've got to start looking at that. So again, watch this space.
No, well, I appreciate a lot of the changes that are being made. I think it's been we've asked for it as an industry for a long time, and I think probably just leading up to Scaffex last year, it was the debate was training. Everyone seemed to want to talk about it. I felt after Scaffex that the air had been cleared a little bit, and there was some light at the end of the tunnel. And I think now we're seeing the evidence of that. I have heard whispers of objection to it and objections to some of the changes. I'm not entirely sure what all of the objections are, but I've heard that they exist. And I guess it's just a case of everybody working together to make sure that as a collective we get the right results, because we need the training centres. We do.
Look, are we committed to the training centres? Absolutely. But saying we're just going to hold the same line and do the exact same thing is exactly the diametric opposite to the change that is actually fundamentally required, as demonstrated by the perception survey. And the quantifiable changes we're making aren't just yeehaw, we're just doing it for doing its sake. When we start talking about outside learning, you cannot get a centre to the specification that we currently specify in Worcestershire. Facts. And so if you're going to tackle the 16, 17-year-old, you've got to start changing it. But does that put a commercial concern in the mind's eye of those that are invested? Absolutely. And I'm deeply sympathetic to anybody who has spent massive amounts of time, effort and energy in producing and building that centre. We want to give them, though, the flexibility. And I'm very much of the opinion, after well-considered view, that we have got a really good structure. We will work with that. We will work with the centres. And, if the centres don't want to carry forward that, that's something that we'll have to start working on. And if they don't want to, then that's fine. But certainly what I am encouraged by is the amount of organisations that are coming forward wanting to be CISRS centres. And I know certainly with the investment that Paul's putting in for the careers executive that we've just brought in, the approaching to FE, the capacity that we will be bringing, we're not talking about the same number of learners. And I think that's the really important message I'd love to get out today, is that actually just working on the number of commercial learners that are going in the centres isn't where I see the sector being. Because if we're going to start getting the 16 to 17-year-olds coming in, guess what? You're going to have more learners. You're going to have greater capacity. And I'd like to think that's the big positive that's going to come out over the period of time. And for all the fear that might be there and anxieties, let's allow time to progress. Final thing, continuous improvement. If we haven't got it quite right, if there's some tweaking we need to make, we'll make that tweaks. Previous management, previous governance, the word no I keep on hearing was the word of the day. No, it's not no. It's about what can we do? How can we do it? How do we make it better? And if we're not doing that, guess what? You're back to the old model of 10 years, sitting, waiting, and no change. But constant change, constant improvement is where we need to be. So, those that have got some doubts, they're being a bit vocal. But actually, look, just come on the journey. Step up into that space and let's see where we go. That's what I'd say.
In closing, what I would also encourage is if there are objections and if there are issues, they cannot be behind closed doors. We have to have open, honest, transparent debate around where we're going as an industry.
I can assure you there's been a couple of wonderful meetings where there's been some very open, honest discussion. We've gone through consultation, and anybody who says, this has all been done through closed doors, no, it hasn't. I mean, we take the training contract, the centres have had a very, very comprehensive now document, which actually, if you look at the document, which they didn't have before, gives them now legal right to hold CISRS to account. They didn't have that before.
So it's a two-way street.
It's a two. Well, I even in the presentation in the meeting when we started talking about this, actually, I'm not sure if you've ever looked at the Old Bailey, and on top of the Old Bailey, of course, there's the Lady Justice with the Sword of Justice, and what's in her left hand?
Oh, the scales.
Scales of justice. And what are the scales about? Balance, fairness. We're not trying to hoodwink the centres. And if they feel that, then we need to talk more. But actually, this is about giving the centres the right to absolutely hold CISRS to account. They don't currently. They don't. They do now.
Well, this is it all seems like very positive stuff. I guess, you know, the conversation is going to unfold more and more. I'm sure we'll have more and more of these interviews, podcasts, and people can have their say and get involved. I would absolutely encourage them to do that, because
forward to it.
The more people the more opinions that we get, the better, I think. But Clive, for making the journey,
my pleasure,
and for coming into the new studio.
Well, I think I did overhear as I came in. Mark was talking about there should be some scaffolding on the wall. I tend to agree. It's beautiful. Don't worry. Beautiful building here in Manchester.
Well, there's a couple of the brickwork here. You could probably see a couple of places where you could get a put log adapter in there, because that's quite a common scaffold that we use a lot.
Apparently, I've heard that. Apparently, we need to do more training on that
area.
area.
I think so. 2-day course just for put logs, I think. But yeah, it's been fascinating stuff. I'm really glad that you could make the journey and come on.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
And welcome back anytime.
Let's
keep the conversation
keep the dialogue going. Absolutely. Speak soon.
Cheers.
Thanks.
I truly hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, all I ask is that you like, subscribe, and get notified every time we drop a new episode.